The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace as King Alexander paced restlessly in his private study. His usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the storm brewing beneath the surface. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner chimed 7 times, marking another sleepless night for the monarch who had ruled the kingdom of Valdoria for 15 years. Queen Isabella sat in her favorite armchair near the window, her hands trembling as she clutched a handkerchief. Her eyes, once bright with the joy of their early marriage, now reflected a deep sorrow that seemed to have settled permanently in her heart. The conversation they had been avoiding for weeks could no longer be postponed. "Alexander, please," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle rustling of the silk curtains. "They are my family, my blood. How can you ask me to choose between you and them?" The king stopped his pacing and turned to face his wife of 12 years. His jaw was set firm, his blue eyes hard as winter ice. "Your family has betrayed not just me, Isabella, but the entire kingdom. Their actions have put our people at risk, our crown in jeopardy. I cannot and will not tolerate it any longer." Isabella's brother Marcus had been caught in a scandal that rocked the very foundations of the royal family. As the Duke of Westmarch and Isabella's closest advisor, he had been secretly selling military secrets to the neighboring kingdom of Estonia, Valdoria's longtime rival. The discovery came through intercepted letters that detailed troop movements, castle defenses, and even plans for new trade routes that could have given Estonia a significant advantage in future conflicts. But Marcus was not alone in his treachery. Isabella's sister Catherine, the Duchess of Millbrook, had been using her position to manipulate noble marriages, creating alliances that would benefit Estonia rather than Valdoria. She had arranged for 3 young noblewomen to marry Estonian lords, effectively creating spy networks within their own borders. Most devastating of all was the involvement of Isabella's mother, the Dowager Countess Evelyn. The woman who had welcomed Alexander into the family with open arms had been the mastermind behind it all. She had convinced her children that Valdoria was weak under Alexander's rule, and that aligning with Estonia would bring prosperity and power to their family line. "You speak of betrayal," Isabella said, rising from her chair with difficulty. The weight of the situation had taken a physical toll on her, and she had barely eaten in days. "But what about loyalty? What about forgiveness? These are values you taught me when we first married. You said that family bonds should be sacred." Alexander's expression softened slightly as he watched his wife struggle with the impossible choice before her. He had loved Isabella from the moment he met her at a diplomatic gathering in the neutral kingdom of Ferrara. She had been different from other noble ladies, intelligent, compassionate, and genuinely interested in the welfare of common people. Her family had seemed equally impressive, with strong values and a commitment to honor. "I did say that," Alexander admitted, his voice gentler now, "and I meant it. But Isabella, your family has put thousands of innocent lives at risk. The information they provided to Estonia has already resulted in 3 failed merchant expeditions and the capture of 2 of our border patrols. Good men have died because of what they did." Isabella sank back into her chair, the full weight of her family's crimes settling upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had suspected something was wrong when her brother began asking unusual questions about palace security, and when her sister started pushing certain marriage arrangements with unusual urgency. But she had dismissed her concerns, believing that family loyalty meant trusting those you loved most. "I know," she whispered, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "I know they have done terrible things, but Alexander, they are still my family." Is there no way to show mercy? Could they not be exiled rather than executed? Could we not find some middle ground? The king moved closer to his wife, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. For a moment, the weight of the crown seemed to lift from his shoulders, and he was simply a husband trying to comfort the woman he loved. Isabella, my dear heart, I have spent weeks trying to find alternatives. I consulted with the council, with our most trusted advisors, even with the high priest. But the evidence is overwhelming, and the damage they have caused cannot be undone. If I show weakness now, if I fail to act decisively, it will signal to other potential traitors that betrayal comes without consequences. Isabella pulled her hands away and stood up abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the palace gardens. Below, she could see the guards practicing their drills, their armor glinting in the morning sun. These were the men who would carry out her husband's orders, who would arrest her family members and escort them to their fates. "What exactly are you planning to do?" she asked, her voice hollow. Alexander remained kneeling where she had left him, his head bowed. "The council has voted unanimously. Your brother Marcus will be stripped of his title and lands. He will be imprisoned for life in the Tower of Sorrows. Your sister Catherine will face the same fate, though her children will be spared and placed under the protection of loyal noble families." "And my mother?" Isabella asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Your mother?" Alexander's voice cracked slightly. "As the mastermind of the conspiracy, she will face trial for high treason. The penalty for high treason, as you well know, is death." Isabella's knees gave way, and she collapsed against the window frame. The handkerchief fell from her fingers as she pressed her palms against the glass, her breath fogging the surface. The woman who had taught her to read, who had sung her lullabies, who had helped her choose her wedding dress, would die because of decisions that Isabella had been powerless to prevent. "When?" she managed to ask. "The arrests will be made today. The trials will begin next week." Isabella turned away from the window, her face pale but determined. "I want to see them, before the arrests. I want to say goodbye." Alexander stood slowly, his own heart breaking as he watched his wife's world crumble around her. "Isabella, that would not be wise. The council members are already questioning your loyalty because you are related to the traitors. If you are seen meeting with them before their arrest, it could be interpreted as—" "I don't care what it could be interpreted as," Isabella interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "They are my family, and I will not let them face their fate without knowing that I still love them, despite what they have done." The king studied his wife's face, seeing the determination that had first attracted him to her, now focused on a cause that could potentially destroy them both. He knew that forbidding her to see her family would only drive a wedge between them that might never heal, but allowing it could give their enemies ammunition to use against the crown. "If you insist on seeing them," Alexander said finally, "it must be done carefully. You will go to them one at a time in the presence of guards, and your conversations will be brief. You will not discuss the charges against them, and you will not make any promises about their fates." Isabella nodded, grateful for even these small concessions. "Thank you, Alexander. I know this is difficult for you, too." As the queen left the study to prepare for her painful farewells, King Alexander remained alone with his thoughts and the terrible burden of leadership. He had always believed that being a good king meant making decisions based on justice and the welfare of his people, regardless of personal cost. But he had never imagined that those decisions would require him to destroy the family of the woman he loved. Outside, the palace was beginning to stir with the day's activities. Servants hurried through the corridors. Nobles gathered in the great hall for the morning meal, and messengers arrived with reports from across the kingdom. None of them knew that before the sunset, the royal family of Valdoria would be forever changed. Alexander moved to his desk and picked up the sealed orders that would set the day's events in motion. His signature at the bottom of each document felt like signing away pieces of his soul. But he was a king first, a husband second, and the safety of his kingdom had to take precedence over his personal happiness. As he prepared to summon his guards and begin the arrests that would tear his family apart, Alexander wondered if Isabella would ever be able to forgive him for what he was about to do. More importantly, he wondered if he would ever be able to forgive himself. The afternoon air in Valdoria Palace felt thick with tension as Queen Isabella made her way through the corridors she had walked countless times before. Today, however, each step felt like walking through a nightmare from which she could not wake. The marble floors that had once seemed elegant now felt cold beneath her feet, and the portraits of former kings and queens seemed to watch her with judging eyes. Her first stop was her brother Marcus's chambers in the East Wing. 2 royal guards flanked the ornate doors, their expressions stoic but sympathetic. They had served the royal family faithfully for years and took no pleasure in what was about to unfold. "Your Majesty," Captain Thompson, the head of the guard, said with a respectful bow, "the Duke is inside. You have 15 minutes, as ordered by His Majesty." Isabella nodded and pushed open the heavy oak doors. Marcus stood by the window, still dressed in his formal court attire, though his usually perfect appearance was disheveled. His dark hair, so similar to her own, was tousled from running his hands through it, and his face bore the weight of a man who knew his fate was sealed. "Isabella," Marcus said softly, turning to face his sister. At 35, he had been the pride of their family, a war hero who had led successful campaigns against bandits in the Northern Territories. Now, he looked like a broken man. "Marcus," Isabella whispered, closing the distance between them and embracing her brother tightly. For a moment, they were children again, seeking comfort in each other's arms after their father had scolded them for some minor mischief. "I'm so sorry, Isabella," Marcus said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I never meant for it to affect you. I thought I was protecting our family's future." Isabella pulled back to look at her brother's face, seeing the regret and shame written clearly in his features. "Why, Marcus? Why did you do it? We had everything we needed here. Alexander was good to our family." Marcus moved away from her, unable to meet her eyes. "Mother convinced me that Alexander was weak, that his policies were making Valdoria vulnerable. She showed me reports that suggested our economy was failing, that our military was falling behind Estonia's. She said that if we didn't act, Valdoria would be conquered within a decade, and our family would lose everything." "Those reports were false," Isabella said, her voice gaining an edge of anger. "Alexander has strengthened this kingdom in every way. Our people are prosperous, our defenses are strong, and our alliances with other kingdoms have never been better." "I know that now," Marcus replied, turning back to face her. "But Mother was very convincing. She reminded me of how Father died fighting in a war that could have been avoided with better diplomacy. She said that Father would have wanted us to ensure the family's survival, no matter the cost." Isabella felt a fresh wave of pain wash over her. Their father, Duke William, had indeed died in battle when Isabella was 16 and Marcus was 21. Their mother had been devastated by the loss, and it had changed her in ways that became clear only now. "Father would have been ashamed of what you've done," Isabella said quietly. "He believed in honor above all else. He would never have betrayed his king or his kingdom, no matter what the perceived threats." Marcus flinched as if she had struck him. "You're right, of course. I've dishonored his memory and brought shame upon our family name. I've destroyed everything he worked to build." The sound of footsteps in the corridor reminded them that their time was running short. Isabella reached out and took her brother's hands, noting how they trembled slightly in hers. "Marcus, I want you to know that despite everything, I still love you. You're my brother, and nothing will change that. But I also want you to understand that I support Alexander's decision. What you did was unforgivable, and justice must be served." Tears formed in Marcus's eyes as he squeezed his sister's hands. "I understand, Isabella, and I'm glad you're standing by your husband. He's a good king, and he's lucky to have you. Promise me you won't let this destroy your marriage." "I promise," Isabella said, though she wondered how she could possibly keep such a vow. The doors opened, and Captain Thompson stepped inside. "Your Majesty, time is up. We must proceed with the arrest." Isabella kissed her brother's forehead one last time and whispered, "Goodbye, Marcus. I will pray for you every day." As she left her brother's chambers, Isabella heard the captain reading the formal charges against the Duke of Westmarch. The words seemed to echo in her mind as she made her way to her sister Catherine's rooms in the South Tower. Catherine's situation was even more heartbreaking. Unlike Marcus, who had clearly understood the gravity of his actions, Catherine seemed to exist in a state of denial about what was happening around her. At 28, she had always been the most idealistic of the siblings, believing that love and good intentions could overcome any obstacle. Isabella found her sister in her sitting room, surrounded by half-packed trunks and scattered jewelry. Catherine looked up with a bright smile when Isabella entered, as if this were any ordinary visit. "Isabella, perfect timing. I was just deciding which necklaces to pack for our trip to the summer estate. Do you think the sapphires or the emeralds would be more appropriate?" Isabella's heart clenched at her sister's obvious attempt to pretend that everything was normal. "Catherine, we need to talk about what's happening." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked, though her smile wavered slightly. "Nothing is happening except that Mother suggested we take a little vacation until this unpleasantness blows over. Alexander will come to his senses soon enough." Isabella sat down beside her sister and gently took the necklace from her hands. "Catherine, this isn't going to blow over. You're going to be arrested for treason. You're going to prison." Catherine's face went pale, but she shook her head stubbornly. "That's impossible. I haven't committed treason. All I did was arrange some marriages between our noble families and Estonian families. Marriage is about love, Isabella. It's about bringing people together, not politics." "You created spy networks," Isabella said gently but firmly. "Those marriages weren't about love, Catherine. They were about giving Estonia access to information about our kingdom's defenses and resources." "I didn't know that," Catherine protested, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "Mother told me that strengthening ties with Estonia would prevent future wars. She said it would protect our people from suffering." Isabella believed her sister. Catherine had always been naive about political matters, preferring to focus on art, music, and romance. It was entirely possible that their mother had manipulated Catherine's good intentions for darker purposes. "I believe you didn't know," Isabella said, pulling her sister into a comforting embrace. "But Catherine, ignorance doesn't excuse the damage that was done. People have died because of the information that was passed through those marriages." Catherine sobbed against Isabella's shoulder, finally understanding the true scope of what had happened. "What's going to happen to my children? Thomas is only 8, and Maria is just 6. They need their mother." "Alexander promised that your children will be protected," Isabella assured her sister. "They'll be placed with loyal, noble families who will raise them well. They'll receive proper education and care." "But they'll grow up without me," Catherine cried. "They'll grow up thinking their mother was a traitor." Isabella had no comfort to offer for this pain. She held her sister tightly, both of them weeping for the future that had been lost and the children who would pay for their parents' mistakes. When the guards came for Catherine, she went quietly, her brief moment of denial replaced by a crushing understanding of reality. Isabella watched from the window as her sister was escorted across the courtyard, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The most difficult visit, however, was yet to come. Isabella's mother, Dowager Countess Evelyn, was being held in the tower's highest room, a location that provided both security and a measure of dignity befitting her former status. Isabella climbed the spiral stairs slowly, dreading the confrontation that awaited her. Unlike her siblings, her mother had orchestrated everything deliberately and with full knowledge of the consequences. There could be no claims of innocence or manipulation here. She found her mother sitting calmly at a small table, writing letters with steady hands. At 55, Evelyn remained a striking woman, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. "Isabella," Evelyn said without looking up from her writing, "I wondered when you would come." "Mother," Isabella replied, taking a seat across from her, "how could you do this? How could you destroy our family like this?" Evelyn set down her pen and finally met her daughter's eyes. There was no shame or regret in her expression, only a cold calculation that Isabella had never seen before. "I did what I believed was necessary to protect our family's future," Evelyn said calmly. "Alexander is a weak king, Isabella. His policies of diplomacy and compromise make Valdoria vulnerable to stronger kingdoms like Estonia." "Alexander is not weak," Isabella protested. "He's brought peace and prosperity to this kingdom." "Temporary peace," Evelyn corrected. "Peace that will shatter the moment a more aggressive ruler comes to power in a neighboring kingdom. I have lived through 3 wars, Isabella. I've seen what happens when kingdoms are unprepared for conflict." Isabella stared at her mother, trying to understand how the woman who had raised her could have become so cold and calculating. "Even if you believe that, how could you justify betraying Alexander? He welcomed you into this family. He trusted you." "I justified it by thinking of your future," Evelyn replied, "and the future of my grandchildren. If Valdoria falls, what happens to them? At least with Estonia's protection, our family line would survive." "And if Valdoria doesn't fall?" "If your actions actually weaken the kingdom and cause the very downfall you claim to fear?" For the first time, Evelyn's composure cracked slightly. I believed I was making the right choice. I still believe it." Isabella stood up, unable to remain seated any longer. "Your choices have cost Marcus his freedom, Catherine her children, and you your life. Was protecting the family really worth destroying it?" "You don't understand," Evelyn said, rising to face her daughter. "You're young, Isabella. You haven't seen the horrors of war, the suffering that comes when kingdoms fall. I was trying to spare you from that." "What I understand," Isabella said, her voice growing stronger, "is that you've betrayed everything Father stood for. He believed in honor, in loyalty, in serving something greater than ourselves. You've taken his memory and twisted it to justify treachery." Evelyn's face went white at the mention of her late husband. "Don't you dare speak to me about your father. Everything I did was to honor his memory by protecting what he left behind." "Father would be ashamed of you," Isabella said quietly, "and I am ashamed of you too." The words hung in the air between them like a physical blow. Evelyn sat back down heavily, suddenly looking every one of her 55 years. "You support your husband's decision to execute me," Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. "I do," Isabella confirmed. "Justice must be served, regardless of family ties." "Then there is nothing left to say between us," Evelyn replied, picking up her pen again. "Please leave me to finish my letters." Isabella walked to the door, then paused and looked back at her mother one last time. "I will pray for your soul, Mother, and I will make sure that history remembers the good you did before this madness took hold of you." Evelyn didn't look up from her writing, but Isabella saw a single tear fall onto the parchment before she closed the door behind her. As Isabella descended the tower stairs, she felt as if she were leaving her old life behind with each step. The family she had known and loved was gone, destroyed by choices made in fear and desperation. Now she faced an uncertain future, torn between her loyalty to her husband and the grief of losing everyone she had grown up loving. The palace corridors seemed darker as she made her way back to her chambers, and Isabella wondered if the sun would ever shine as brightly for her again. 3 weeks after the arrests, the trials had concluded, and the sentences had been carried out with the swift efficiency that King Alexander was known for. The kingdom of Valdoria had watched in somber silence as justice was served, but none felt the weight of those decisions more heavily than Queen Isabella, who had lost her entire family in one devastating blow. The morning of her mother's execution, Isabella had locked herself in the royal chapel, refusing to eat or speak to anyone, including Alexander. She knelt before the altar for hours, praying for her mother's soul and begging for the strength to continue living with the knowledge that she had supported her husband's decision to end her own mother's life. Alexander found her there as the sun began to set, collapsed on the cold stone floor in front of the massive crucifix that dominated the chapel's altar. Her elaborate gown was wrinkled and dirty, her carefully arranged hair had fallen loose around her shoulders, and her face was streaked with tears that had dried and been replaced by fresh ones countless times throughout the day. "Isabella," Alexander said softly, approaching her slowly as one might approach a wounded animal. "Please, my love, you need to eat something. You need to rest." Isabella didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse from hours of weeping. "She's dead, Alexander. My mother is dead, and I told her I was ashamed of her. Those were the last words I spoke to her." Alexander knelt beside his wife, his own heart breaking at the sight of her anguish. "Isabella, you spoke the truth to her. Sometimes the truth is painful, but it was necessary." "Was it?" Isabella asked, finally looking at him with eyes that seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. "Was it necessary for me to abandon her completely? Could I not have shown her mercy in her final days, even while supporting justice?" Alexander had been asking himself similar questions since the execution that morning. As he had watched the woman who had once helped him learn Valdoria's customs and traditions face her death with dignity, he had wondered if there might have been another way to handle the situation. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I wish I could tell you that everything we did was perfect and necessary, but the truth is that I'm not sure there were any good choices left to us." Isabella slowly pushed herself up from the floor, accepting Alexander's help to stand. Her legs were unsteady from kneeling for so long, and she leaned heavily against him for support. "What happens now?" she asked. "How do we move forward from this? How do we rebuild our lives when the foundation of everything I believed about family and loyalty has been destroyed?" Alexander guided her to one of the chapel's wooden pews, and they sat together in the flickering light of dozens of candles that Isabella had lit throughout the day. The sweet smell of incense hung in the air, creating an atmosphere of peace that seemed at odds with the turmoil in their hearts. "We take it one day at a time," Alexander said, taking Isabella's hand in his. "We honor the memory of the good things your family did while acknowledging the harm they caused. We work to be better leaders and better people because of what we've learned from this tragedy." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, staring at the altar where she had spent so many happy hours planning palace celebrations and royal ceremonies with her mother and sister. Those days seemed like they belonged to someone else's life now. "Alexander," she said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course," Alexander replied, though he felt a knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. "Do you blame me for what they did? Deep down in your heart, do you hold me responsible for their betrayal?" Alexander turned to face her fully, taking both of her hands in his and looking directly into her eyes. "Isabella, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for your family's choices. You had no knowledge of their plans, no involvement in their betrayal." You are as much a victim of their actions as anyone else in this kingdom. But if I had been more observant, if I had asked more questions when Marcus started acting strangely, or when Catherine became so focused on those marriage arrangements—" "Stop," Alexander interrupted gently but firmly. "You cannot torture yourself with what-ifs. Your family deliberately hid their activities from you because they knew you would never have supported them. They protected you from their conspiracy because they loved you, even as they betrayed everything you believed in." Isabella considered his words, finding some small comfort in the idea that her family had at least tried to shield her from their treachery. "Do you think they truly believed they were protecting our family's future? Or were they simply motivated by greed and power?" Alexander had spent considerable time thinking about this very question during the trials. The evidence presented had painted a complex picture of people motivated by fear, ambition, and misguided love rather than simple greed. "I believe your mother genuinely feared for your family's survival," Alexander said carefully. "Her letters and testimony suggested that she was haunted by your father's death in battle and obsessed with preventing similar losses in the future. But I also think her fear made her vulnerable to Estonian manipulation." "Estonian manipulation?" Isabella asked, surprised by this revelation. Alexander nodded grimly. "During the investigation, we discovered that Estonian agents had been feeding your mother false intelligence about Valdoria's military weaknesses and economic problems. They deliberately cultivated her fears and convinced her that cooperation with them was the only way to protect her family. This information cast her family's betrayal in a slightly different light for Isabella. While it didn't excuse their actions, it helped her understand how good people could make such terrible choices when consumed by fear and fed false information." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Isabella asked. "Because I didn't want you to think I was trying to excuse their actions or minimize the harm they caused," Alexander replied. "Justice still had to be served, regardless of how they were manipulated into their betrayal." Isabella stood up from the pew and walked back to the altar, lighting one more candle for her family's souls. As she watched the flame flicker to life, she felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness for their actions, but perhaps the beginning of understanding and peace. "Alexander," she said without turning around, "I want to do something to honor the good memories of my family while also acknowledging the harm they caused. I want to establish a foundation in my father's name that will provide education and support for children whose parents have been lost to war or political conflict." Alexander joined her at the altar, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I think that's a beautiful idea, Isabella. Your father would be proud. And I want to write letters to the families of the soldiers who died because of the information my family provided to Estonia," Isabella continued. "I want to apologize personally and offer whatever support the Crown can provide." "That's very generous, but you don't need to take responsibility for—" "Yes, I do," Isabella interrupted, finally turning to face him. "Not because I'm guilty of their crimes, but because I bear the family name. Those families deserve to know that someone from my family acknowledges their loss and grieves for their sacrifice." Alexander saw in his wife's face a strength and resolve that reminded him of why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. Despite everything she had endured, she was still thinking of others, still trying to find ways to heal the wounds caused by her family's betrayal. Over the following months, Isabella threw herself into the charitable work she had proposed. The foundation she established in her father's name became one of the kingdom's most successful humanitarian efforts, providing education and care for hundreds of children affected by political conflicts. Her personal letters to the families of fallen soldiers were received with gratitude and respect, helping to heal some of the divisions created by her family's treachery. Alexander watched his wife's transformation with a mixture of admiration and concern. While her charitable work clearly provided her with purpose and healing, he worried that she was pushing herself too hard as a way of avoiding her grief rather than processing it. Their relationship, too, was slowly healing, though it bore scars that would never fully disappear. They had learned to be honest with each other about their fears and doubts in ways they had never been before. Alexander shared his struggles with the burden of making life-and-death decisions, while Isabella opened up about her ongoing grief and her fear that she might one day face a similar betrayal from someone else she loved. One evening, 6 months after the trials, they sat together in the palace gardens, where Isabella often went to find peace. The roses were in full bloom, filling the air with their sweet fragrance, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Do you ever regret marrying me?" Isabella asked quietly, a question that had haunted her for months. "If you had married someone else, someone without such a complicated family, you would never have faced the political crisis that my family's betrayal created." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Isabella, if I had married someone else, I would have had a different life, with different challenges and different joys. But I cannot imagine loving anyone the way I love you, or finding in anyone else the strength, compassion, and wisdom that you bring to our partnership." "Even after everything that's happened?" "Especially after everything that's happened," Alexander replied firmly. "The way you've handled this crisis, the way you've turned your pain into purpose, the way you've supported justice even when it hurt you personally, these things have only deepened my love and respect for you." Isabella leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling truly at peace for the first time since the nightmare began. "I love you too, Alexander, and I'm grateful that we faced this together rather than letting it drive us apart." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, both the king and queen of Valdoria understood that while their family crisis had ended, the work of healing and rebuilding would continue for years to come. They had learned painful lessons about loyalty, justice, and the complex nature of love and family bonds. The kingdom of Valdoria had emerged stronger from the crisis, with renewed respect for the rule of law and the difficult decisions that leadership sometimes required. King Alexander's decisive action had sent a clear message that betrayal would not be tolerated regardless of family connections, while Queen Isabella's charitable work had demonstrated the crown's commitment to healing and supporting those affected by political conflicts. In the years that followed, the royal couple would face other challenges and make other difficult decisions, but they would face them together, armed with the knowledge that their love could survive even the most devastating tests, and that sometimes the most painful choices were also the most necessary ones. The memory of Isabella's family served as both a warning and a warning about the dangers of fear and manipulation, and a reminder that even good people could make terrible choices when they lost sight of their principles. Most importantly, it reinforced their commitment to leading with wisdom, courage, and unwavering integrity, ensuring that the tragedy of one family's fall from grace would serve to strengthen the kingdom they had sworn to protect and serve.